Star Trek Ascendancy in review. Join me on the bridge. Star Trek Ascendancy is a 4X game. 4X meaning explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate. There are several games on the market like this. They're long games for many players. This game initially was released for 3 players, with the 3 factions being the Romulans, the Federation, and the Klingons, with plans to have more expansions with more factions released later on, all from the Star Trek universe. The Star Trek universe has a lot of legs. It's been around since the late 60s with the original series, and then has gone on with plenty of other television series, films. There are even 2 in production right now, TV series. So there's a lot of material to draw upon. And the base set was, I think the plan was at the time to have 10 factions included in the game, or released over the game's lifespan. Currently there are 7, with an additional one being the Borg, which is kind of an AI-driven faction that the game plays on itself. There's a complete other discussion that can be had upon how they function in the game, but we won't go there right now. But suffice to say, there are 7 factions, but for the purposes of this review, we're going to stick with the original 3 that were released in the base game, and get right into it. And basically, Star Trek is a world based, primarily like the science fiction. It's primarily science based. You get there are a lot of action sequences. There are fist fights, gun fights, space battles, all that sort of thing, romance, and whatever else you'd expect on a TV series. But the primary focus has always been on the science, and this game is certainly no departure from that. There's a fair amount of combat, but there's a good emphasis placed on the exploration part. There's certainly luck involved in this, and if you're not into luck, again, I would suggest that you look elsewhere to have fun. Now, the game does have some downside to it, but like with a lot of 4X games, there's player elimination, there's downtime. So if those are things that you don't like, also you might want to look elsewhere. But if you're into Star Trek, certainly this game evokes this Star Trek theme very well. The game looks good. It's produced very well, and as I mentioned, at this time, several years after the initial release of the game, there are 7 factions to choose from. So there is that added variety. You can play with an expanded game group. I've only ever been able to play with 4 players, but usually we play with 4 players, my game group, and it's always been a lot of fun. The game is broken out into 3 stages. The first stage would be the initiative stage, the second one would be the execution stage, and the last and third would be the recharge stage. So the first would be initiative, and that's handled with this deck of cards that comes with the game, the turn order deck. Now, there are cards numbered from 1 to 10. There were plans for up to 10 factions in the game, so you would merely take the amount of cards that you have for players that are playing, include one also for the AI Borg, if you're including them in your game, and then you would just randomly shuffle them and hand them out. Also, there's a way to bid for initiative. Once any of the factions or players have made contact, what's called first contact with each other, they're allowed to exchange trade agreements, and also that opens up the door for bidding on initiative. And how you would do that is just to use any amount of any of the 3 resources included in the game, production, research, or culture, and just bid an amount of those, and then the highest bidder would have the opportunity to select whichever card they wish. Obviously you'd want to take the first one, but maybe somebody would want to go last. I don't know why you'd want to bid on that, but anyways, you can choose whichever one you want, going to the highest bidder. And once you've determined the turn order, play would then move over to the execution stage. Now, that's divided into 2 phases. There would be the building phase, and everybody's got one of these handy little cards. The building phase, and on the other side there's the command phase. So you would start out on your turn with the building phase. Now, just about all the factions are identical in terms of the information that's on here. There are some slight variations based on faction-specific information, but that would also be on their card. But for the most part, everybody's is going to operate the same. So what you do is you would start in the building phase, and there are a number of things that you can do. The first would be to build a starship at your home planet, your home system, or from one of your star bases, and that would cost you 1 production. And what you can do when you do build starships, so let's say you spend 3 or more and you buy 3 or more starships, you can then form a fleet depending on how much ascendancy you have. All of the players start with 1 ascendancy to indicate that they are warp level civilization, and then you're trying to accumulate more levels of ascendancy, right, to raise your civilization and culture up. And that's ultimately one of the 2 paths to victory in the game, and probably the most common one is to accumulate 5 ascendancy tokens. These fellas right here. As I said, you start with 1, and then you would want 5 of them. And how you do that, to accumulate ascendancy tokens, you would be spending culture. Culture is one of the resources that is generated in the game from culture nodes. We'll get into that as we move down here. But at any point on your turn, you can turn in 5 culture tokens for an ascendancy token. Now, based on the number of ascendancy tokens that you can have that many space stations and also that many fleets. So, getting back to the fleets, there are no variation in the ships in this game like you would see in some other 4X games. Basically, you have starships. That's it. But what you can do is that you can form them into fleets, and you have these 3 fleets. All the factions have access to 3 fleets, and each of them have different abilities. And as you can see here, for the Klingons, the first fleet they have is the Marauders fleet, which take 1 production for each rival ship destroyed by this fleet. You have the Battle Group. This fleet may re-roll to hit rolls of 1 in space battles. And then you have the Assault Fleet. This fleet may re-roll to hit rolls of 1 in planetary invasion. So you have some variance on the fleets. And based on the number of your level of ascendancy, those are the amount of fleets you can have up to a max of 3. On the flip side of the fleet cards, they are generic fleets that can hold more ships. As you can see on the initial fleets here, you have a minimum of 3 ships that you can form into a fleet. Once one of those is destroyed and you're dropped down to 2, the fleet is disbanded. You could also choose to voluntarily disband your fleet, and you may want to do that at some point during the game. If your fleet is out too far from something you need to do close, you can just disband it, drop whatever ships were in that fleet onto the system, and then you can form up, spending a command. And typically that's how you'll be forming fleets, is with command. So anyways, you have a minimum of 3, and these specialist fleets can range anywhere in size from 3 to 4, 5, or 6. They're typically smaller. On the flip side of the card, you can have just a generic battle fleet, and that can have anywhere from 8, 9, or 10, depending on what faction you have. So just to have more offensive punch, but they don't have any special abilities. So when you could build starships at your base, your home system or your star base, and they're going to cost you 1 production each. The second thing on your building phase is that you can build a production node. So if you've discovered a planet that is undeveloped, you can put one of these red plastic nodes, and that indicates that there's production. You have to have a slot available on the planet, and it'll show you a little red marker that there's an open slot for production. That'll cost you 2 production resources. Or you can build a research node for 2 research tokens and 1 production token. And the same, you would put one of these blue plastic nodes on an open slot on a system that can accept a blue research node. And then you have a culture node, spending 2 culture tokens and 1 production token to put one of these yellow plastic culture nodes on a system. So this is how you're developing a system, because these plastic nodes will generate these tokens for you, right? So there's initial outlay, but then you have the turn after turn regeneration in the recharge phase. And then lastly, you can choose to colonize a sector. You can't build nodes until you colonize a sector. Everybody has their own specific control node in their own faction color, and this is what you would put on the planet first in order to place production nodes later on. Now, how you do that is that you would cannibalize a starship. That would be thematic in terms of starships have all kinds of equipment and and useful items and whatnot to start up the initial process of colonizing one of these systems. So you would cannibalize a starship, sacrifice one of those, and a culture token to place one of these control nodes on the planet, and then you can start to place production or research or culture nodes afterwards. The last thing you can do in the building phase is commit research. You can, any of your advancements that you have open, and we'll get to how you do that in the command phase, any of those, you're allowed to have a number of advancements equal to your research nodes. And then what you can do in the building phase is take research tokens, add them to your advancements. Just be careful how you're doing this. Be very choosy on the advancements that you're choosing. You know, you could draw one that maybe is not going to suit your needs in the game. You're going to want to pass on it maybe, and just wait for one that is going to be, you know, more conducive to the strategy that you have available to you, depending on what systems you have and whatnot, because they're not, you can't just keep throwing research on all of these advancements. It's a finite resource research. You're going to want to focus probably, or at least what I've seen, on spending those on weapons and shields, right? And that's what you can also do in part of the commit research phase. So there's generally not enough research to go around to just start upgrading everything, right? So be very careful and choosy about the advancements you're going to be spending your research on. And then of course you can spend to upgrade your weapons and shields. That is very important in this game. Basically you're starting out hitting on 5s on a D6. You can spend 4 research to upgrade your slider here to hit on 4s, and then it's going to cost you 6 research to move up to hit on 3s, and then 8, and then 10, etc. And same with shields, it's going to cost you 6 research to give you a shield modifier of 1, then 8 for a modifier of 2, 10 for 3, etc. They get really expensive, and they can be game changers when you start getting into the space fleet battles for control of systems, you know, very late in the game where it's really important. So you're going to want to probably focus on that first, as opposed to just, oh, that looks like an interesting research advancement, and find that you can't use it, and you have no shields, and you're getting pummeled, you know, out on the board, right? So anyways, that's the building phase. These are the things you can do in the building phase. Then you would flip over to the command phase. Now, just about all of the factions start with 5 command tokens, and what you do is you exhaust these, you flip them over and exhaust them to show that you've used it on one of these actions here in the command phase. The way to get more command tokens is to commission and build a star base, and you can only have a number of star bases equal to your ascendancy tokens. Some factions have access to more command, like the Cardassians, but they have limitations that go with that. But for the most part, the base game, they're starting with 5 each, right? And you're going to get more based on star bases. So the first thing you can do is to move. You would exhaust the command to move. Now, what that means is that you could move a single starship, or you could move a fleet. You could move at impulse power, which allows you to move 2 spaces on one of these space lanes. You're not going to be doing that too often. Typically, you want to do that just to tie up space lanes, because you will stop other fleets or ships that are at warp from moving right into you know, a system that you value, or your home system, or wherever. Ships will block space lanes. Now, you can also, as part of moving, move at warp speed. Now, how you do that is with command tokens. You drop 1 command token, flip it over to drop your fleet at warp. You take it off of the board, you place it to the side, and then you spend command tokens on the number of systems that you want to move. Normally, especially at the beginning of the game, you'll be spending 3 command tokens to move at warp, because you don't want to be moving. You're going to roll this 6-sided die that has numbers between 2, 3, and 4 on it. This is the space lane die, and you roll this, and this will indicate, you know, I got a 2 here, but let's say you get a 3. It'll indicate the size of the space lane that you now are moving into. So if you decide to move at impulse, you're only going to be able to move halfway down. So normally you would spend 3, 1 to drop into warp, 1 to move to the end of the space lane, another 1 to drop out. Then you would draw one of the planet tiles or the system tiles to see what system that you drew. And then you would also draw one of these exploration cards to see, you know, how it's inhabited, if it's inhabited, what type of system it is. If it's a phenomena, a black hole, it could be an asteroid belt. There's a variety of these in the game, and there are all sorts. The only thing that you would need to do at the beginning of the game is to cull both of these, the exploration deck and the system tiles, to make sure that there are 2 for each player that don't have crisis cards or hazards. Crisis meaning in the exploration deck, and hazards in the system tile pile, because it can happen if you were to draw, you're just starting the game, the first system you explore is a hazard, and it's a hazardous system, and it's got a crisis that could really knock you back, and if that's how you're starting the game, it's not fair, right? So there's a way to mitigate that, and that's just to make sure that you eliminate 2 for each player. So if you have 3 players, you would make sure the top 6 system tiles are not hazards, and the top 6 exploration cards have no crisis in them. So anyways, that you would drop, as part of your move, you would exhaust 3 commands to get to the end of the space lane and explore a new system, right? So that's basically moving, right? Another thing you could do is you can just drop into warp and stay there, and then in the recharge phase, you get a free warp token, and that allows you to move an extra system without exhausting command whenever you just decide to drop out. Creates a little bit of menace, keeps people on their toes. Where are you intending on going? And it saves you command. The next thing you could do is hegemony. Now, this is one of the interesting parts of the game that you don't often see in a lot of 4X games, is that instead of just outright invading, whether it's one of your rivals in a system or if it's one of the neutrals that you discover in the exploration deck, like this warp-capable level 3 civilization, you could try to use hegemony, and that's basically convincing them, you need to join us. We're it in the galaxy, and these are the benefits. Like you would see in all of the Star Trek episodes with the Federation. As a matter of fact, the Federation in this game, they cannot invade. They have to use hegemony to control other systems. So what you would do there is you could attempt to culturally take control of a developed system that you occupy. And the way to do that is you roll a die and you add the number of ascendancy you have to that roll, and then you're trying to roll over the number of nodes, including control nodes. Control nodes count as nodes. So a fully developed system will have 4 nodes on it, and if your rival has, let's say, 2 ascendancy, then the number is 6, and you need to roll over that with your d6 plus your ascendancy, right? So, and plus you also have to spend 2 culture tokens in order to do that. So it's a costly process if it fails. I've tried this repeatedly. This is a game of luck. The dice sometimes work in your favor, sometimes they don't, but that represents all the negotiating and whatnot, and I think it works really well. So you can attempt to do that. It'll cost you a command and 2 culture. Now you could also attempt to invade a system. That'll cost you a command token as well to invade a system. And how you do that is you take the number of starships that you have in the system, and then you're trying to roll successful hits based on the number of nodes that are on the system, right? So let's say the system is fully developed and has 4 nodes on it. You need to roll 5 successes to completely take over. Then you swap out your rival's node and you put one of yours in there. If you roll equal to, if you get 4 successes on a fully developed system with 4 nodes, you raise the whole planet. You can develop it after yourself, but you don't spare anything. It was a costly struggle. If you get less, if you get 1, 2, or 3 successes, you're destroying nodes based on those, and the control node is the last one to go. So that's how planetary invasions work, and there are ways to augment this. With there are fleets. For example, the assault fleet here, the Klingon assault fleet, reroll 1s for planetary invasions, and so forth. So there are ways to within the game to modify, augment, and otherwise change the how these are going to take place. But that's the idea. Initiate a space battle. Spend 1 command to initiate a space battle. Then what you do is you line up your ships or your fleets, and you start rolling off. The attacker and defender roll their dice simultaneously. There are some abilities like the Romulan cloaking starting advancement that allows them to get a shot off first, removing casualties, and then only whatever ships are left of their rivals get to fire back. So, but for the most part, it's going to be simultaneous. You roll dice, and you're trying to roll on your to-hit number based on your weapons value. So starting the game, it's going to be on 5+. So if you have 6 ships in your fleet. You're rolling 6d6. Any hits of a 5+ will take out a rival ship, depending if they have shields or not, if they've upgraded their shields. Everybody starts with a 0, but if they're upgraded, let's say to 1, then that 1 would modify the rolls, and then you would need to roll 6s. And if you're, if their shields are too strong and you can't damage them, for example, you have no upgraded weapons, they have shields of 2, it's pointless for you to try unless, of course, you have this Klingon special ability, disruptor technology, their starting advancement. 6s always hit, right? So the Klingons can always have a shot. But anyways, that's how it works. You remove casualties until the attacker decides, I'm going to retreat. Then the defender can decide if they want to retreat, and then you merely retreat at impulse, right? It's provided you can. If all space lanes are blocked into the system, you just can't retreat. It's rare that happens, but it can. Or you can, next you can launch projects, right? So draw 2 new projects, discard projects as needed to stay below your max, and the max is based on the number of research nodes you have on the board. So you draw up 2 cards and keep whichever one you want. Depending, you could keep 2. But as I mentioned before, just be wise with these, because they can really not, some of them just may not help you depending on the setup that you were dealt in the game. And it's going to, if you commit too much research to these cards, you won't have enough for weapons and shields. That I've seen it happen a number of times. It's very rare that you're just a machine when it comes to research or any of these resource production, right? So be careful with that. And then finally, you can commission a starbase or a fleet by exhausting a command. Now, it's good to get starbases out because you can project your production of fleets, forward away from your home system, project that power out. But again, it's a max to your ascendancy. So there you have the command phase. Then play would move on to the recharge phase, and that's where you gain your resources, any special abilities that are indicated on your cards or on your faction control panel. You would take care of that in the recharge phase. You would place any research tokens on any phenomena. There are phenomena systems in the game, like the Stellar Nursery, for example, where you would have a research token and you place it on there, and if you brave the hazard, you can claim that research token. So that's another way to gain research, is to mine these phenomena as you discover them around the board. In the recharge phase, you put a new token on there, and if you decide to leave a ship in that phenomena, you have to brave it on that turn, and if you do, you can claim the research token, and that can go directly onto one of your advancements, so you don't have to wait for the building phase to do that, which is really cool. And so that's one of the systems that you can get. Now, to talk about the systems a little bit, you have hazards, which will have a number up at the top of them that will indicate a 3, 4, 5, or a 6 in red. And when you enter the system, or if you want to brave the system, you have to roll a d6, and if you roll that number or higher, then a ship is destroyed. And if you have a fleet, you have to roll a d6 for all of the ships in your fleet, unless you have a specialist, like a science fleet, or there's a couple of fleets that some of the factions have where you just roll 1 die, lose 1 ship, because they know how to deal with these phenomena. But those are pretty neat. Some of them can be pretty unforgiving. Your shields, of course, will help with this. So if you have shields of 1 and you discover a phenomena with a level 6 hazard, you're good. You don't even have to roll, because your shields are going to save you from that 6 if you were to roll the 6. So those are hazards. There are different types. Some hazards you can develop in the game, so that's pretty neat. And then you have exploration cards, which you're going to draw each time you unveil a system, right? So you have different kinds. You'll have Virgin System, discover an untouched planet, perfect for colonization. In other words, just go ahead. Then you'll have civilizations, pre-warp level 0 civilization, and you'll have to deal with them in one way or another. This one, for example, has 2 production tokens that you can just take on the system. It's a pre-warp civilization, independent civilization. First player to colonize the system claims the tokens. You'll have other warp developed systems that you'll have to try to perform hegemony or invade, and these can be really tough. Like a level 3 is really tough. There's a chart that'll indicate, based on their level, what their shields are, what their weapons are, what their what their level is, and they can be quite tough. Level 3 would have level 3 shield, so it's going to, depending on how high your ascendancy is and which faction you are, you're going to need to be careful on how you deal with these. There are level 1, there's level 2. So this is really good, and it's very very much in line with what you would see in Star Trek. With all these different levels of technology, civilizations that are discovered and interacted with, and that it shows up in this game very well. So that's, and then you'll also have, like I said, there are crisis cards, there are discovery cards which have different effects in them. You can also trade in the game, as I mentioned earlier. When you do make contact with one of the other rivals, you can trade agreements. For the most part, you'll get 1, 2, or 3. So you maybe trade your level 3, which is 3 production. In the recharge phase, you get extra production. And you're gonna have to judge who you want to trade with, who you want to fight with, because the Klingons, they gain culture. For example, let's look at their board here. They have death before dishonor. Klingons may never retreat or surrender a planet, but ever victorious. Take 1 culture when you defeat 3 or more ships in a space battle. So they're encouraged to get out and fight. They get production from the Marauder fleet. So you're going to have to balance, who you want to fight with, who you want to trade with. And quite often you're going to break trade agreements by just turning on somebody. So there's that element in the game as well. So all in all, if you like Star Trek, you're going to like this game. Like I mentioned earlier, it does have downtime. It does have player elimination. Just be kind to new players. If you're an experienced group, just kind of try to help them out. Like, don't walk them through the whole game, but if you see them doing something that's going to cause them to be fall behind the 8 ball early, just help them out with that, because that can happen in this game. There are situations that can come up if you're just trying to spread yourself too thin too quickly. If you're the Cardassians, for example, you need to leave a ship above his systems to get production, and if you branch out and you wind up into trouble and you have these developed systems, for 2 turns where you're not getting any production, you're going to be out of the game. And that's just all there is to it. So just try to help people along with some of the obvious things, because there are some very faction-specific things, but they do tie into, what you'd expect from those factions, from what you've seen in the films or the TV series, right? So if you're familiar with Star Trek, they can be explained pretty simply. If you're not, just take a second to show people, this is the strengths and weaknesses of your faction, right? But other than that, you'll have a really good time playing the game. The expansion factions come into the game and add a lot more of that same kind of flavor, little nuance differences on their control panels and starting advancements. All cultures get factions get a starting advancement. They're all really good, and I would recommend trying these out. The expansions as you get them. There are 7 factions now. The only caveat is the Borg. Now, the Borg, while very fun and the pieces are cool and some of the stuff they do is really interesting, I wouldn't suggest playing with them in your first game. Maybe not your first 2 games. And really do some research online on how to include them into your games. Because if they come out early and again with some of the early moves in the game, they can really throw things off for a player if not handled correctly. And the rules are a little ambiguous, and you're going to have a lot of questions, and you would really have to study online what other people have come up with and workarounds, because the rules out of the box were just kind of, like I said, ambiguous. And I think it would be nice if Gale Force 9 would just create a set of rules for the Borg to include as a player faction, or just update and fix the rules that were written for them. But they do work, and they're a lot of fun, and they're really cool. It's just, it can be really swingy, depending on your play level and how many times you've played. So just be careful with them. But aside from that, I think this is a very solid game. Great 4X. It's going to take a while to play, but it's fun, especially, as I mentioned, if you're a Star Trek fan. The space battles, some of the end moves on the game, there are some 1-2 punches that you would see in a 4X game. This game is no different. Some 1-2-3 combos to kind of win the game. Some epic moves, with some very decisive backstabbing and space battles and that sort of thing. So it's a lot of fun. and it feels epic. It feels like Star Trek. So if you're into all that, then you're going to like this game, and I would definitely recommend it and give it a couple of thumbs up. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Take care.